This 4-year-old beggar girl is tied to a pole for committing a terrible crime, but a millionaire woman arrives furious and does something shocking. Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The morning sun beat down hard on the town square of Willow Creek, Montana, as 6-year-old Isabel was tied to the rusty iron lamppost like an animal. Her small hands strained against the ropes, cutting into her delicate wrists, while silent tears streamed down her dirty face. The crowd gathered around, whispering cruel judgments about the curly-haired girl in ragged clothes who had dared to take an apple from a fruit stand. "That'll teach this little brat not to steal," yelled Mr. Oswald, the owner of the fruit stand, adjusting his stained apron. "It's not the first time this kid's shown up here causing trouble." Isabel kept her eyes fixed on the ground, trying to become invisible. Her stomach had been aching with hunger for 2 days, and the bright red apple had seemed like salvation. Now, tied up like a trophy of shame, she just wanted to disappear. People passed by, some stopping to watch the spectacle, others averting their gaze with discomfort. "Just look at the state of that child," murmured Mrs. Berenice, a 60-year-old woman with platinum blonde hair, adjusting her expensive purse. "Someone should call Child Protective Services. Where are this girl's parents?" "Doesn't have any," replied a young mother, holding her own child's hand tightly. "Lives on the streets, sleeping in any corner. Seen her rummaging through the trash behind the supermarket." The murmur of the crowd grew, each comment more cruel than the last. Isabel closed her eyes, trying to transport herself far away, to anywhere where there were no ropes cutting into her skin or looks that made her feel less human. It was then that she heard firm footsteps approaching, different from the others. When she opened her eyes, she saw an elegant 52-year-old woman walking purposefully toward her. Victoria Sinclair wore an impeccable navy blue dress and shoes that gleamed in the sun, contrasting sharply with the atmosphere of the town market. "What do you think you're doing?" Victoria's voice cut through the air like a knife. Her dark eyes flashed with indignation as she surveyed the scene. "This is a child, not an animal." "Mrs. Sinclair," Mr. Oswald tried to justify himself, nervous before the most influential woman in the region. "The girl was stealing. We needed to teach her a lesson." "Lesson?" Victoria knelt before Isabel, her heart clenching as she saw the child's condition. The ropes had left red marks on her small wrists, and the girl's eyes were filled with a fear that no child should know. "The only lesson I see here is about human cruelty." Without hesitating, Victoria pulled a small silver knife from her purse, an object she used to open letters in her office, and began to cut the ropes. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from a contained fury that surprised her. "You can't do that," protested Oswald. "She needs to learn that she can't just take what isn't hers." "And you need to learn that a hungry child isn't a criminal," Victoria replied without taking her eyes off Isabel. When the last rope came loose, the girl rubbed her aching wrists, still not believing she was free. Victoria extended her hand to Isabel, who looked at it with distrust. Throughout her short life, adults had meant danger, shouting, rejection. But there was something different about this woman. Her eyes didn't carry the coldness that Isabel was used to seeing. "What's your name?" Victoria asked softly, keeping her hand outstretched. "Isabel," the girl whispered, her voice hoarse from crying in silence. "Isabel." Victoria repeated the name as if it were precious. "Are you hungry?" The girl nodded timidly, and Victoria felt something stir in her chest, an old pain mixed with a maternal instinct that she thought had died 15 years ago, along with her daughter Clara. "Then let's get something to eat," said Victoria, finally getting Isabel to take her hand. "And then we'll go home." The crowd murmured in disapproval. Mrs. Berenice stepped forward, her face contorted in an expression of displeasure. "Victoria, you can't just take this girl," she said, adjusting her gold-rimmed glasses. "We don't know anything about her. where she came from, what kind of people. I know exactly what kind of people she is, Victoria interrupted, her voice loaded with a determination that made several people step back. A child who needs help. And if that bothers you, maybe you should question what kind of people you are. As they walked through the market, Victoria bought fresh bread, fruit, and an orange juice for Isabel, who ate with a voracity that broke the businesswoman's heart. The girl didn't speak, only observed everything with attentive eyes, as if trying to understand if this was real or just another cruel dream. Norbert Sinclair, Victoria's younger brother, watched the scene from afar, leaning against his imported car. At 48, he had always lived in the shadow of his sister's success, nurturing an envy that grew with each of her achievements. Seeing Victoria acting impulsively, bringing a street girl home, awakened in Norbert an opportunity that he didn't intend to waste. "This is going to cause trouble," he muttered to himself, a calculating smile forming on his lips. "Victoria has finally made a mistake I can use against her." When they arrived at Victoria's house, an elegant two-story building in the wealthiest neighborhood of Willow Creek, Isabel stopped at the door, intimidated by the grandeur of the place. The large windows, the manicured garden, the furniture that gleamed through the glass, everything seemed to belong to a world different from hers. "This is your home now?" Victoria said gently, opening the carved wooden door. Isabel entered slowly, her bare feet making small noises on the waxed wooden floor. Each room seemed bigger than any place she had ever been. The living room had white sofas that looked like clouds, a huge television, and pictures on the walls that showed beautiful places. "You can choose a room," Victoria offered, going up the stairs. "There are 3 empty bedrooms upstairs." But when they reached the first room, decorated with floral wallpaper and a 4-poster bed, Isabel recoiled, shaking her head vigorously. "I don't like big rooms," she whispered, her eyes searching for dark corners where she could hide. Victoria observed the girl's reaction and understood. Big rooms meant spaces where dangerous people could hide, where screams would echo, where a small child would feel lost and vulnerable. "How about this one?" She opened the door to a smaller room, used as an office. It had only a desk, an armchair, and a window that overlooked the backyard garden. Isabel examined the space carefully, checking all the corners, testing whether the door closed properly. Finally, she nodded. "Let's get a bed for you," Victoria said, already mentally planning all the changes she would need to make. Meanwhile, outside, Mrs. Berenice chatted animatedly with other neighbors, planting the first seeds of a campaign that would completely change the lives of Victoria and Isabel. "It's not normal," she said, gesturing dramatically. "A single rich woman suddenly decides to take a street girl home. What kind of person does that? What if she has mental problems? What if she's dangerous to the child?" The seeds of discord were planted, and Victoria still didn't imagine the storm that was coming. The first few days in Victoria's house were a roller coaster of emotions for Isabel. The girl woke up before dawn, when the house was still silent, and lay motionless in the new bed that Victoria had bought, a simple piece of light wood furniture that wasn't as intimidating as the grand rooms she had rejected. Her ears were alert to any noise that could mean danger. On the first morning, Victoria found Isabel huddled under the desk, sleeping on the cold floor, despite the comfortable bed a few feet away. The businesswoman's heart ached as she realized that the girl still didn't trust the safety she was trying to offer. "Good morning, honey," Victoria said softly, crouching down to be at Isabel's level. "Did you sleep well?" Isabel just watched her with those dark, intelligent eyes, as if trying to decipher the woman's true intentions. Victoria had spent the whole night thinking about how to handle the situation, consulting websites on traumatized children, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of having such a hurt little person in her home. "I made breakfast," Victoria continued, keeping her voice calm. "There's warm French bread, fruit, orange juice. You can eat whatever you want." In the kitchen, Isabel sat on the edge of the chair, ready to flee at any moment. Victoria placed a plate with bread, butter and jelly in front of her, watching how the girl first smelled each item before tasting it, like a wild animal testing if the food was safe. "Can you tell me where you came from?" Victoria asked carefully, pouring coffee for herself. Isabel stopped chewing, her muscles tensing. For a moment, Victoria thought she wouldn't answer, but then the small, hesitant voice was heard. "Lived with Aunt Candy," said Isabel, not lifting her eyes from the plate. "But she left and said she couldn't take care of me anymore. Left a note saying I'd be okay on my own." "How long ago was that?" Victoria felt her throat tighten. "Many days," Isabel replied vaguely. For a 6-year-old, the notion of time was imprecise, but Victoria suspected it had been much longer than a few days. "And your parents? Do you remember them?" Isabel shook her head vigorously. "Aunt Candy said they couldn't take care of me, that it was better not to ask about them." Victoria felt a mixture of anger and sadness. What kind of adult abandons a 6-year-old child? What kind of society allows this to happen without anyone noticing or caring? The phone rang, interrupting the moment. It was Norbert. "Victoria, I need to talk to you." His voice sounded tense. "It's about the girl you brought home yesterday." "What about her?" Victoria replied, watching Isabel shrink back in her chair as she heard the higher tone of her voice. "People are talking, sis. Mrs. Berenice is spreading rumors that you kidnapped a child, that it's not normal for a single woman in her 50s to suddenly decide to adopt a street girl." "I didn't kidnap anyone." Victoria lowered her voice as she realized Isabel was hearing everything. "I saved a child who was being publicly humiliated." "I know that, but you don't understand how things work here," Norbert continued. "You've always lived in your bubble of success. But Willow Creek is a small town. People talk, judge, create stories, and Berenice has influence. She's already organizing a group of concerned citizens to protect the girl." Victoria looked at Isabel, who had completely stopped eating, and was watching the conversation with an expression of growing panic. The girl had learned, through painful experiences, that when adults argued about her, bad things happened. "I'll call you later," Victoria said, hanging up the phone. "Isabel, honey, it's okay. No one's going to take you away from here." But the girl had already gotten up from the table and ran to her room, slamming the door shut. Victoria heard her dragging furniture, probably pushing the desk against the door to barricade it. During the rest of the morning, Victoria tried to convince Isabel to come out of the room, but the girl didn't respond. Only in the late afternoon, when she brought a plate of food and sat in the hallway outside the door, was she able to hear the muffled voice. "Are you going to send me away too?" asked Isabel. "Never," Victoria replied firmly. "You're safe here, Isabel. I promise." "Aunt Candy promised too," came the reply, loaded with a pain that no child should carry. Victoria leaned her head against the door, feeling tears burn her eyes. She had lost her own daughter, Clara, in a car accident 15 years ago. The girl was only 8 years old when a rainy night and a drunk driver destroyed Victoria's world forever. Since then, she had obsessively dedicated herself to work, building an empire of handmade candies that she distributed throughout Montana, but nothing had filled the void left by Clara. Now, looking at that closed door, she knew that Isabel had awakened something she thought was dead forever. The maternal instinct, the need to protect, to care for, to love unconditionally. The next morning, Victoria found the bedroom door ajar, and Isabel sitting on the floor, reading a book she had taken from the living room bookshelf. The businesswoman was surprised. She didn't know the girl could read. "Is that book interesting?" she asked, sitting on the floor next to Isabel. "It's about a girl who lives in a castle," Isabel replied, not lifting her eyes from the pages. "But she's not happy because the people in the castle are mean to her." Victoria observed how easily Isabel read complex words, her perfect pronunciation, the way her eyes moved quickly across the lines. This wasn't an ordinary child who had learned to read at school. "Where did you learn to read so well?" she asked. "On my own," Isabel replied simply, looking at the signs on the street, the posters, the newspapers people threw away. Aunt Candy said I was very smart, that I learned things just by looking. Victoria felt a chill. That girl was exceptionally intelligent, and that intelligence had been her tool for survival on the streets. How many other children like Isabel existed out there, wasting their potential for lack of opportunities? "Would you like to go to school?" Victoria asked carefully. Isabel finally looked up, and Victoria saw fear in them. "The kids at school don't like me. They say I'm dirty, that I smell bad, that I don't have a family." "That was before," Victoria said softly. "Now you have a family. You have me." For a brief moment, something shone in Isabel's eyes. Hope, maybe, or longing. But quickly, the cautious expression returned. "The people are going to try to take me away from you," she said with a frightening maturity. "It always happens. When someone tries to be nice to me, other people show up and ruin everything." Victoria felt her heart breaking. How many times had that child experienced hope only to see it destroyed? "Not this time," Victoria promised. "This time it's going to be different." But even as she spoke, she knew that making that promise would be harder than she imagined. Norbert had called again in the morning, saying that Berenice was organizing a meeting to discuss the case of the abandoned girl. Several influential families from the town would be present, including retired Judge Herminio Silva and the principal of the town's elementary school, Ms. Marisa. "They're going to question your ability to care for a child," Norbert had warned. "They're going to say that you haven't gone through any official process, that there's no supervision, that it could be dangerous for the girl." Victoria looked at Isabel, now absorbed again in reading, and made a decision. If they wanted to question her ability to be a mother, they'd have to prove she wasn't fit, and she didn't intend to make it easy for them. "Isabel," she said, "how about we go shopping? You need new clothes, shoes, maybe some books of your own." The girl looked at her distrustfully. "Why?" "Because you live here now," Victoria replied, "and people who live here deserve to have their own things." For the first time since arriving at the house, Isabel smiled, a small and hesitant but genuine smile, and at that moment Victoria knew she would do anything to protect that smile. The weeks that followed brought a fragile but hopeful routine to Victoria's house. Isabel began to explore the rooms with more confidence, although she still preferred sleeping on the floor rather than in the bed, and always checked the door locks before relaxing. Victoria learned to respect these safety rituals, understanding that they were survival mechanisms that the girl had developed. The businesswoman also discovered other surprising aspects of Isabel. The girl had an impressive photographic memory. She could recite entire conversations she had heard days before, remembered minute details about the people she met on the street, and absorbed information with a speed that left Victoria both amazed and worried. "Why do you remember so much?" Victoria asked one afternoon, after hearing Isabel repeat word for word a conversation they had overheard at the bakery 3 days earlier. "Because by paying attention to things, you know when you have to run," Isabel replied naturally, as if it were obvious. "If you don't pay attention, you might not realize that the person is getting angry, or that they're going to hurt you, or that they're going to send you away." The simplicity of the answer hit Victoria like a punch to the stomach. That child had transformed trauma into a survival tool, developing skills that no child should need to have. It was during one of those afternoons that Norbert showed up at the door unannounced. Isabel, who was playing in the garden with a stray kitten she had adopted, immediately ran inside the house when she saw him arrive. "Does she always run away when she sees visitors?" Norbert asked, watching the girl disappear through the back door. "She's cautious with strangers," Victoria replied, noting the calculating tone in her brother's voice. "It's normal for a child who's been through what she's been through." "Yes, about that." Norbert entered the living room uninvited. "I need to tell you some things I've found out." Victoria felt a weight in her stomach. She knew that expression on her brother's face. The same one he used as a child before telling their mother about some mischief she had done. What kind of things? I looked into information about that Candy who took care of the girl, he said, sitting on the sofa as if he owned the place. And I discovered something interesting. Candy Silver was admitted to the psychiatric hospital in Sacramento 3 months ago in serious condition. The doctors say she keeps repeating the name Valentina all the time, as if she's looking for someone. Victoria felt the floor move beneath her feet. Valentina? Yes. And here's the interesting part. The medical records show that she was brought in by a social worker who said Candy was delirious about protecting a girl from dangerous people. When they asked about which girl, she only said, "Valentina is safe. Valentina is hidden." "You think Valentina is Isabel?" Norbert completed. "I don't even think that's her real name. And if it isn't, that means there's a lot more to this story than we imagined." Victoria glanced in the direction of the kitchen from where low noises were coming. Isabel was probably hiding behind the counter, listening to everything. The girl had a disturbing talent for becoming invisible when she wanted to. "Why are you telling me this?" asked Victoria, suspicious. "Because I'm your brother, and I care about you," Norbert replied. But there was something false in his voice. "And because Berenice is organizing a meeting tomorrow night. She's gotten the support of Judge Herminio and several influential families. They're going to question your ability to care for a child with such a mysterious past." Mysterious? Think about it, Victoria. A child who has no documents, whose name may be false, who was abandoned by a woman who's now in a psychiatric hospital talking about protecting someone from dangerous people. That raises a lot of questions. Victoria felt the trap closing around her. "And what do you think I should do? Hand Isabel over to the system?" "I think you should investigate further before getting more deeply involved," Norbert said, getting up. "And maybe consider that a child with that kind of baggage can bring problems that you're not prepared to face." After he left, Victoria found Isabel exactly where she had suspected, crouching behind the kitchen counter, hugging the kitten tightly. "You heard everything, didn't you?" she asked softly. Isabel nodded, her eyes big and scared. "My name is Valentina," she whispered. "Aunt Candy called me Isabel so no one would find me. She said Valentina had to stay hidden." Victoria knelt beside the girl, trying to process this information. "Hidden from whom?" "I don't know." Valentina, Isabel, shook her head. "Aunt Candy never really explained it to me. She just said there were bad people who wanted to take me away, and that as long as I was Isabel, I'd be safe." "And do you remember anything from before you lived with Candy?" The girl closed her eyes, concentrating. "I remember a big house with a lot of stairs, and a woman who cried a lot. She hugged me and said it was for my own good, that one day I would understand." Victoria felt a chill. That story was getting more complex and dangerous. "Do you want me to keep calling you Isabel?" she asked. "I don't know," the girl replied honestly. "I like it when you call me any name, because you speak kindly. Other people always spoke as if my name was a bad thing. That night, after Isabel fell asleep, still on the floor, but now with pillows and blankets that Victoria had arranged especially for her, the businesswoman stayed awake, researching on the internet. She looked for cases of missing children, kidnappings, illegal adoptions. She found dozens of similar stories, but nothing that helped her understand Isabel's specific situation. It was when she was about to give up that she found a news story from 3 years ago. Traditional Willow Creek family searches for missing daughter. The article mentioned a 3-year-old girl who had mysteriously disappeared from her maternal grandparents' house. There was no photo of the child, only a description: dark curly hair, brown eyes, a moon-shaped birthmark on her right shoulder. Victoria felt her heart race. Carefully, she went upstairs and peeked at Isabel sleeping. The girl was sleeping on her side, and Victoria could clearly see a small dark mark on her right shoulder, exactly as described in the news story. The next morning, Victoria tried to act normally, but Isabel noticed her tension. "You're worried," said the girl during breakfast. "Is it because of what the man said yesterday?" "A little," Victoria admitted. "But I want you to know that no matter what we find out about your past, you'll always have a place here. Even if I'm not really Isabel? Even if you're a princess from another planet?" Victoria smiled, managing to elicit a giggle from the girl. But the tranquility was short-lived. In the late afternoon, a van from Child Protective Services stopped in front of the house. Isabel, who was playing in the garden, immediately dropped her toys and ran inside. "I need to talk to you," said the social worker who got out of the vehicle, a serious 40-year-old woman named Denise. "We've received several complaints about a minor in an irregular situation." Victoria invited Denise inside, while Isabel disappeared down the hallways of the house. For an hour, the social worker asked questions about how Isabel had arrived there, what Victoria's plans were, whether there was documentation for the child. "Do you understand that you can't just adopt a child informally?" Denise explained. "There are procedures, evaluations, a legal process that must be followed. And while that process is happening, what happens to Isabel? She would be placed in a temporary foster home, supervised by the state, until the situation is resolved." "No," Isabel's voice came from the hallway. The girl appeared at the door of the living room, pale but determined. "I'm not going to any home. I'll run away again." Denise looked at the child with surprise. "Honey, it's for your safety." "That's a lie," Isabel interrupted. "Adults always say that when they want to do things that are going to hurt me. I've lived in foster care before. I know what it's like." Victoria looked at the girl, shocked. Isabel had never mentioned that before. "When did you live in foster care?" asked Denise. "Before Aunt Candy picked me up," Isabel replied. "They kept asking me questions, separated me from other kids, and said it was temporary, but the kids stayed there forever. Some adults came to look at us as if we were dogs in a pet shop. The silence that followed was heavy and uncomfortable. Finally, Denise sighed. "I'll give you 2 weeks to start the legal adoption process," she said, getting up. "After that, I'll be obligated to follow protocol." After the social worker left, Victoria hugged Isabel, who was trembling like a leaf. "2 weeks," murmured Victoria. "We have 2 weeks to discover the truth about your past and resolve everything legally." But as she said this, a terrible certainty grew in her heart. Berenice's meeting the next day wouldn't just be about questioning. It would be the beginning of a battle that would determine Isabel's future, and her own. The meeting at Berenice's house took place on a cold July night. Victoria wasn't invited, but she knew every detail through Norbert, who actively participated in the discussions. Meanwhile, she stayed at home with Isabel, trying to maintain normalcy. But both knew that something important was being decided about their lives. "They're talking about me, aren't they?" Isabel asked, looking out the window in the direction of Berenice's house, where several lights were on. "Yes," Victoria replied honestly. She had learned that lying to Isabel was useless. The girl had an almost supernatural ability to detect falsehoods. "And they're going to try to take me away from you." "They're going to try," Victoria confirmed, sitting beside her on the sofa. "But I'm not going to let that happen." Isabel was silent for a long moment, then whispered, "Aunt Candy said that too." The next morning, Norbert appeared early with a somber expression. Isabel immediately hid when she saw his car, leaving Victoria alone to face the bad news he was surely bringing. "It was worse than I imagined," he said without preamble. "Berenice managed to convince everyone that you're having an emotional breakdown, that you're using the girl to fill the void left by Clara." Victoria felt as if she'd been slapped. She has no right to talk about Clara. "But she did," Norbert continued. "And she got the support of Judge Herminio. They're going to pressure Child Protective Services to remove the girl immediately, claiming that you're psychologically unstable." "That's ridiculous." "Yeah, but it's convincing." Norbert helped himself to coffee without being invited. A 52-year-old woman, single, who lost her daughter tragically, suddenly rescues a street girl and decides to adopt her informally. To conservative people like them, that seems like an act of desperation, not of love. Victoria looked out the window, seeing Isabel hidden behind the tree in the backyard, watching everything. The girl was learning to become invisible again, preparing to run. "There's more," Norbert continued. "Professor Murillo, who tutors several children in the town, said he saw a girl who looked like Isabel about 2 years ago at an expensive private school in Sacramento. She was registered under another name, Valentina Santos. And the tuition fees were paid from a bank account linked to a woman named Miriam Santos, who disappeared without a trace around the same time the girl stopped attending school." Victoria felt the world spin. Each new piece of information made the situation more complex and dangerous. "There's something you're not telling me," she said, observing her brother's guilty expression. Norbert hesitated before speaking. "I hired a private investigator to investigate the girl's past." "You did what?" Victoria stood up abruptly. "It was necessary, Victoria. You were getting involved in a situation that could be much more dangerous than you imagine. What if the girl was kidnapped? What if there are people looking for her? What if you end up being accused of complicity? What if she's just an abandoned child who needs love?" Victoria countered. "Did you ever think of that possibility?" "Love doesn't solve everything," Norbert said coldly, "and your tendency to act on impulse has caused problems before." The phrase hit Victoria like a knife. He was referring to Clara's accident, a night when she had decided to go out to buy ice cream despite the rain because her daughter had a fever and was asking for something sweet. If she had stayed home, if she hadn't been impulsive. "That was cruel," whispered she. "It's true," Norbert replied, "and I'm not going to stand idly by and watch you repeat the same mistakes." At that moment, Isabel appeared in the kitchen doorway, her eyes fixed on Norbert. There was something different in her expression, a coldness that Victoria had never seen before. "I know you," said Isabel slowly. Norbert frowned. "What do you mean?" "You were at the private school where I studied. I saw you talking to the principal, asking about a girl named Valentina Santos. It was after that conversation that I had to leave." The silence in the kitchen was absolute. Victoria looked at her brother, seeing surprise and something akin to panic in his eyes. "That's impossible," he stammered. "I never—" "You were wearing a brown suit and had a black briefcase," Isabel continued with the chilling precision of her memory. "You told the principal that you were a private investigator and that you were looking for a missing child. The next day, Aunt Candy took me out of school and said we had to move." Victoria felt the floor collapse beneath her. "Norbert, explain to me what's going on." But before he could answer, the phone rang. It was Denise, the social worker. "I need to come over there now," she said, her voice tense. "We've received new information about the girl." "Information that completely changes the situation. What kind of information? I can't talk about it on the phone, but I suggest you prepare the girl. It may be necessary to remove her today." Victoria hung up the phone, her hands trembling. She looked at Isabel, who was pale but calm, and at Norbert, who was avoiding her gaze. 2 years, said Victoria slowly. "You've been investigating Isabel for 2 years. Before I even met her. Victoria, I can explain. Explain then." She approached her brother, her voice dangerously low. "Explain why my own brother is sabotaging the only good thing that's happened in my life in 15 years. Norbert took a deep breath. "Because I was hired to find her." "Hired by whom?" "By Rosangela Santos, her biological mother." Isabel gasped, and Victoria felt as if the world had stopped spinning. "Rosangela got pregnant very young," Norbert continued quickly. "Her family is traditional, conservative. They forced her to give the child up for informal adoption through intermediaries. Miriam Santos was one of those intermediaries. She would keep the children temporarily until she found suitable families. And Candy? Candy was an employee of Miriam's. When Miriam disappeared with several children, including Valentina, Rosangela hired me to find her daughter. Victoria looked at Isabel, who was hugging the kitten tightly, trying to process the information. Why didn't you tell me this from the beginning? Because when you brought Isabel home, I saw an opportunity, Norbert admitted. Rosangela pays me very well to find her daughter, but you've always had everything. Success, money, the love of our parents. I wanted to see you fighting for something. I wanted to see you suffering like I've always suffered, living in your shadow. The confession left Victoria speechless. During all those years, she had never realized her brother's resentment. So you used a traumatized child to get revenge on me? It wasn't exactly like that. It was exactly like that, Victoria shouted, losing control. You manipulated Berenice, spread doubts about my sanity, put Isabel in danger all out of jealousy. Isabel stood up slowly, still holding the cat. My real mom, does she want me back? The simple question cut through Victoria's anger like a knife. She looked at the girl, seeing hope and terror fighting in her eyes. I don't know, she answered honestly. She wants to, said Norbert. Rosangela married 2 years ago to a man who doesn't know about the daughter. She wants to resolve the situation so she can move on with her life. Resolve the situation, Victoria repeated, incredulous. That's how she refers to her own daughter. Norbert didn't answer, but his expression said it all. It was then that they heard cars arriving. Through the window, they saw the Child Protective Services van, followed by 2 cars. Denise got out of the first vehicle, accompanied by a man in a suit whom Victoria didn't recognize. From the second car came a young blonde woman, who must be Rosangela, accompanied by an older, well-dressed man. They've come to get you, Victoria said to Isabel, her voice choked with emotion. Isabel looked at the people approaching the house, then at Victoria, then at Norbert. Her expression was disturbingly calm for a 6-year-old. I'm not going, she said simply. Honey, maybe it's better. I'm not going, Isabel repeated, her voice firmer. And if you try to force me, I'm going to tell them all that the man there, she pointed to Norbert, has been stalking me for 2 years, and that you're working together to hand me over to people I don't know. The doorbell rang, interrupting the conversation. Victoria looked at Isabel, then at Norbert, and made a decision that would change everything. Isabel, go to your room and lock the door, she said. Don't come out of there for anything, no matter what you hear. And then, Victoria took a deep breath, preparing for the battle of her life. Then I'll take care of it, once and for all. Victoria opened the door with her heart pounding erratically. Denise entered first, followed by the man in the suit, who introduced himself as Dr. Ricardo, a lawyer specializing in child law. Behind them came Rosangela, a 22-year-old with nervous green eyes, accompanied by a dark-haired man of about 35, who held her arm possessively. Where's Valentina? Were Rosangela's first words, her voice trembling. She's safe, Victoria replied, studying the woman who claimed to be Isabel's mother. There were physical similarities, the same curly hair, the same shape of the eyes. But something in Rosangela's posture made her uncomfortable. We need to resolve this quickly, said the man accompanying her, introducing himself as Joaquin, her husband. My wife has emotional issues related to the past that need to be closed so we can move on. The way he spoke made Victoria shiver. Rosangela lowered her eyes like a child being reprimanded. Ms. Sinclair, Dr. Ricardo took the floor. We understand your good intention in welcoming the girl, but there are serious legal issues here. The child was illegally removed from the custody of her legal guardian, and Candy abandoned her, Victoria interrupted. Isabel was living on the streets when I found her. That doesn't change the fact that the child needs to be returned to her biological family, continued the lawyer. Rosangela is the mother and has legal rights. Denise remained silent, observing the interaction with a worried expression. Victoria realized that the social worker was also uncomfortable with the situation. I'd like to speak to Valentina, said Rosangela softly. Isabel, Victoria corrected. She chose that name. She was 3 years old when she was taken, Joaquin intervened sharply. She couldn't choose anything, and we don't want her to maintain connections with the period when she was missing. Victoria looked at Norbert, who remained quiet in a corner, avoiding her gaze. Her brother's betrayal still ached like an open wound. What if she doesn't want to go with you? Asked Victoria. She's a child, Joaquin replied coldly. Children don't decide where to live. Responsible adults decide for them. How did you decide to give her up for informal adoption when she was just a few months old? Victoria retorted. Rosangela paled, and Joaquin stepped forward, clearly irritated. That's none of your business. Rosangela was very young. She wasn't able to... And now she is? Victoria insisted. What changed? She has a husband now, Dr. Ricardo replied diplomatically. A stable family, financial resources. And experience with children? Victoria asked directly to Rosangela. Have you ever cared for a 6-year-old? Do you know how to deal with traumas, nightmares, fears? Rosangela opened her mouth to answer, but Joaquin silenced her with a look. Where is the girl? He asked impatiently. We want to get this over with. The way he referred to Isabel as this made something break inside Victoria. Denise, she addressed the social worker, do you really think this is the best solution for Isabel? Denise hesitated before answering. The law is clear about family reunification. The law is also clear about the best interest of the child, Victoria interrupted. And a traumatized child being handed over to strangers, even if they are biological relatives, can cause even more damage. It was at that moment that they heard a noise coming from the stairs. Everyone looked up and saw Isabel descending slowly, holding the handrail with one hand and the kitten with the other. Her face was pale, but her expression was one of determination that surprised the adults present. Are you my mom? She asked directly to Rosangela. Rosangela swallowed hard, her hands trembling. Yes, I am. Isabel studied her for a long moment, her photographic memory processing every detail. I remember you, she said finally. You cried a lot, and you always said it was better this way. I was very young, Rosangela began, but her voice failed. And now you don't cry anymore? Isabel asked with the brutal honesty of children. She's fine now, Joaquin answered for her. She has a stable life, a suitable home. I wasn't talking to you, Isabel said without taking her eyes off Rosangela. I talked to her. The silence that followed was embarrassing. Rosangela looked at her daughter as if she was seeing a ghost, unable to form words. Do you want to take me away? Isabel continued. Yes, Rosangela whispered. For your safety, so that you have a real family. I already have a family, Isabel said simply, looking at Victoria. And here I feel safe. You don't understand, Joaquin intervened again. You're too little to understand what's best. I understand that you don't like me, Isabel interrupted him, her voice still calm. I see it in the way you look at me, as if I were something dirty that he wants to clean. The accuracy of the observation shocked everyone. Joaquin turned red, but did not deny it. And you, Isabel addressed Rosangela, don't really want to take me. You want to get rid of the guilt. I know the difference. Dr. Ricardo tried to intervene. Girl, you need to understand that legal issues... My name is Isabel, she cut him off, and I understand that adults sometimes do things that hurt children and say it's for their own good. Victoria felt her heart breaking. That child had developed a cruel wisdom about the world of adults. Isabel, Denise crouched down to be at the girl's level. I know it's difficult, but your biological mother has rights. And me, Isabel asked, don't I have any rights? Don't I have the right to stay where I feel safe, where someone really wants me? The question echoed in the room like a cry for help. Victoria looked at Rosangela, expecting some maternal reaction, some sign that she would fight for her daughter. But the young woman just lowered her head, letting Joaquin speak for her. What the child wants is not relevant, he said coldly. "She has been emotionally manipulated by people who have no legal right over her." "No one manipulated me," Isabel replied with impressive dignity for her 6 years. "I know when someone likes me for real and when someone is pretending." Norbert, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "Isabel is right," he said, surprising everyone. "I've spent 2 years watching this situation, and I can say that Rosangela is not here out of maternal love. She's here because she wants to get rid of a problem that prevents her from moving forward with her marriage." "Shut up!" Joaquin exploded. "You were paid to find the child, not to give opinions." "I was paid to find her," Norbert agreed, "but not to hand her over to people who will mistreat her emotionally." Victoria looked at her brother with surprise. There was something different in his eyes, regret perhaps, or a late awareness of what he had helped set in motion. "Rosangela," Victoria addressed the young woman directly, "look at your daughter. Really look at her. See how intelligent she is, how brave, how she survived traumas that would destroy many adults. Do you really want to take her from a place where she is flourishing and put her in an environment where she will be seen as a problem to be solved?" Rosangela finally raised her eyes, meeting Isabel's gaze. For a moment, mother and daughter looked at each other in silence. Tears began to stream down Rosangela's face. "I'm so sorry," she whispered to Isabel. "I'm so sorry for abandoning you. I'm so sorry for not being strong enough to protect you." "Rosangela," Joaquin warned her, seeing that she was going off script. "I'm so sorry for not being able to be the mother you deserve," Rosangela continued, ignoring her husband. "And I'm so sorry for being here, trying to tear you away from someone who clearly loves you more than I managed to love." "Then don't take me," Isabel said simply. "Let me stay where I'm happy." Joaquin took a step towards his wife. "But Doctor..." Ricardo stopped him. The lawyer had realized that the situation was getting out of his control. "We need to discuss this more calmly," he said diplomatically. "Maybe it's best if we all come back tomorrow." "No," Isabel said firmly. "I want you to decide now. I don't want to spend another night not knowing if I'm going to wake up here or be taken away." The child's demand was fair, and everyone knew it. What Isabel didn't know was that Joaquin had an alternative plan, one that didn't depend on Rosangela's cooperation, and that would change everything again. The silence in the room was broken only by the ticking of Victoria's antique clock. Joaquin whispered something urgent in Dr. Ricardo's ear, while Rosangela remained still, tears streaming silently down her face. Isabel remained in the middle of the room, holding the kitten, waiting for the adults to decide her fate. It was then that Joaquin took a step forward, his expression changing to something darker. "Since my wife is clearly emotionally distraught," he said in a controlled voice, "I will take responsibility for the situation. Dr. Ricardo, proceed with the removal of the child." "Wait," Denise intervened. "Denise, I need to better assess the conditions." "There's nothing to assess," Joaquin cut her off. "I have here the documents that prove Rosangela's maternity and our financial ability to care for the child. The law is clear." Victoria felt despair taking over. "You can't just take a child like she's an object." "I can and I will," Joaquin replied coldly. "And if you try to stop me, you'll be accused of kidnapping." It was at that moment that Norbert stepped forward. "Actually, you can't." Everyone turned to him, surprised. "Explain yourself," Dr. Ricardo demanded. Norbert took a deep breath, as if he were making the most important decision of his life. "During my investigation, I discovered something that changed everything. Rosangela isn't Isabel's only biological mother." The silence that followed was absolute. Rosangela raised her head, confused, while Joaquin tensed. "What do you mean?" Victoria asked. "I mean that 15 years ago, 2 babies were born in the same hospital on the same day, to 2 very young mothers who were pressured to give the children up for adoption. The intermediaries mixed up the documentations intentionally to make future tracing difficult." Victoria felt the world spinning around her. "You're saying that—" "I'm saying that there's a real possibility that Isabel isn't Rosangela's biological daughter," Norbert continued, "and that Rosangela's real daughter may be somewhere else." Dr. Ricardo turned pale. "That's impossible. We have documents." "Forged documents," Norbert retorted. "Miriam Santos wasn't just an intermediary. She ran an illegal adoption scheme that separated children from their biological families on purpose, selling them to families who paid more." Joaquin took a threatening step toward Norbert. "You're lying to protect your sister." "I'm telling the truth to protect an innocent child," Norbert replied, not backing down. "And I have proof." He took an envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket. "Original documents that I found in Miriam Santos's abandoned office, including DNA tests that she kept as insurance against the families involved." Victoria looked at Isabel, who was watching everything with that expression that was too serious for a child. "What does this mean?" she asked. "It means that the only way to resolve this definitively is to do a DNA test between Rosangela and Isabel," Norbert explained. "And until that result comes out, the child cannot be removed from her current home." "How long will that take?" Denise asked. "A few weeks," Dr. Ricardo replied reluctantly. "A few weeks during which this woman can disappear with the child," Joaquin protested. "Or a few weeks during which you may discover that you're trying to take the wrong child," Victoria retorted. Rosangela, who had remained silent throughout the discussion, finally spoke. "What if she's not my daughter?" she asked in a trembling voice. "What if I've spent all these years looking for the wrong child?" "Then you keep looking for the right one," Joaquin replied brutally. "But we're not going to waste any more time on this farce." The cruelty of the words hit everyone in the room. Isabel took a step towards Rosangela, her eyes filled with a compassion that no child should need to have. "You're also lost," she said softly to the young woman, "like I was before I found Victoria." Rosangela sobbed, crouching down to be at Isabel's level. "Forgive me for being weak," she whispered, "for not having fought for you, or for whoever you are. I forgive you," Isabel replied simply, reaching out her small hand to touch Rosangela's face. "But you can't take me just because you feel guilty. That's not going to make you feel better." The child's wisdom left everyone speechless. Joaquin, realizing that he was losing control of the situation, tried one last move. "Enough!" he shouted. "Rosangela, get up! Let's go! With or without the child, this charade is over." But Rosangela didn't move. She remained kneeling in front of Isabel, holding the girl's small hand. "No," she said, her voice gaining a strength that no one had heard before. "I'm not going to take her, not like this." "Rosangela," Joaquin warned her. "No," she repeated, standing up and facing her husband. "I've spent 6 years feeling guilty for abandoning my daughter. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life feeling guilty for tearing a child away from a mother who really loves her." "Have you lost your mind?" Joaquin asked, incredulous. "On the contrary," Rosangela replied, straightening her shoulders. "For the first time in years, I'm thinking clearly. This child is well cared for, loved, safe. If she is my biological daughter, I can be part of her life without destroying the family she found. If she isn't, I can continue looking for my real daughter." "And our marriage?" Joaquin asked coldly. Rosangela looked at him, then at Isabel, then at Victoria. "If our marriage depends on me giving up motherhood, or on me causing suffering to an innocent child, then maybe it's not a marriage worth preserving." The statement landed like a bomb in the room. Dr. Ricardo tried to circumvent the situation. "Madam, I suggest you think carefully before making hasty decisions. The only hasty decision I made was agreeing to take a happy child out of her home without even knowing her properly," Rosangela retorted. "Isabel is right. I came here to resolve my guilt, not to be a mother." Victoria felt tears burning her eyes. For the first time since it all began, there was real hope. "So what do you propose?" Denise asked. I propose that we do the DNA test, Rosangela replied. If Isabel is my biological daughter, we'll negotiate a way for her to keep Victoria as the main maternal figure, while I learn to be a real mother. If she isn't, she stays with Victoria, and I continue my search. That's ridiculous, Joaquin exploded. I'm not going to accept a wife who maintains contact with a child who may not even be hers. Then maybe you need to find a different wife, Rosangela replied with a calm that surprised everyone, including herself. Joaquin looked at her as if he didn't recognize her. You're going to regret this, he said, heading for the door. I'm leaving. And when you get tired of this maternal fantasy and come back begging, I may not be available anymore. I understand, Rosangela replied simply. After Joaquin left, slamming the door, the atmosphere in the room changed completely. Dr. Ricardo, realizing that there was no more case to fight, said goodbye politely. Denise offered to coordinate the DNA test and Victoria's legal adoption process. When they were finally alone, Victoria, Isabel, Rosangela and Norbert, a different silence hung in the air. It was no longer tense or threatening, but reflective. Why did you change your mind? Isabel asked Rosangela. Because you reminded me of what it's like to be abandoned, Rosangela replied honestly. And because I realized that being a mother isn't about owning a child, but about wanting the best for her. Isabel nodded, as if that answer made perfect sense to her. And you, she addressed Norbert, why did you help me in the end? Norbert crouched down to be at her level. Because I learned that jealousy can make us cause a lot of suffering to innocent people. And because you taught me that courage has no age. Can I ask you a question? Isabel said to Rosangela. Sure. If you find out that I'm not your daughter, will you be sad? Rosangela thought carefully before answering. I'll be sad that I still haven't found my daughter, but I'll be happy to have met you, and to have learned that love can take many different forms. Isabel smiled, the first truly happy smile that Victoria had seen since she had met her. So now we're a different family, said the girl. Not normal, but ours. And for the first time in 15 years, Victoria felt complete again. Not because she had replaced Clara, but because she had learned that the heart can love in infinite ways, and that family is much more about choice than about blood. A few weeks later, when the DNA results came confirming that Isabel was not Rosangela's biological daughter, no one was surprised. But by then, they had already discovered that it didn't matter. Rosangela continued her search for her real daughter, but now as part of Isabel's extended family. Victoria began the legal adoption process. Norbert used his experience as an investigator to help other families in similar situations. And Isabel? Isabel finally had what she had always been looking for, a place where she could be a child, where she was loved unconditionally, and where she learned that sometimes the best families are those we choose, not those we are born into.